Fine with me.
We're recording now. Today is March 23rd, 2022, a little after 11 a.m., and I'm here in the home of Bill Vollano. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Welcome, Connor.
I appreciate it. And just while we're on the record, I just want to say how happy I am to be able to be here and interview Bill. Bill has done countless veteran oral histories, and those are now located in the Eastern Michigan University archives. And we are more than happy to have him be a part of our collection there at the EMU archive. So,
Well, I've been trying for practically the better part of a year to find a permanent home, local permanent home. And your archive department has been the only one that really followed through.
well, we're happy to do that. And that was, I think I've told you this, that was my first project as an employee for the archives. So it was good, and like I said, before I met you for the Fox 2 interview, had listened to your voice for countless hours, and so it was good to put a face to a voice. So in that similar vein, I've heard you ask many of these same questions to many proud veterans. So, Bill, could you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. My birth date is 10/20/30, and I've been looking for somebody who had a similar birthday. I finally came upon Joyce Brothers, but she was a year older, had the same birthday. And of course, Mickey Mantle had the same birthday, but he was a year younger. And it wasn't until I came to Michigan that a clerk in the Flagstar Bank told me that her mother was celebrating her birthday, and that was on my birthday. And we were in the same day, same year. So it took me all that time to find somebody who had the same birthday.
That's lovely. How long were you in Connecticut for?
I came here in '77. I started working here on Halloween, frankly, in 1977. I didn't have my family with me, but that's when I started working here.
Did you graduate from high school in Connecticut?
Oh yes, high school, and then I went to University of Connecticut, and then from there I went to the University of Pennsylvania with a school of social work and got my master's degree there.
And could you explain to me your parents, their names, and who they were?
Yeah, I have a picture there of my father, one of my father's jewelry stores, and he was quite a guy. I think he had probably a third grade education, if that. Came to America when he was just an infant. He was born in year 2000. I'm not 2000, 1900. My mother was natural born, and her name was Raphone. We called her Mary, but I think my grandfather named her Marie Antoine. But he had all strange names for my uncles, and it was Alexander and Rudolfo and Americo Vespucci, just on and on.
I'm glad you brought up your uncles. I know from listening to your interviews and the Fox 2 interview that several of your uncles served in the armed forces.
I had 4 uncles, all who saw active duty, who were in not only active duty, but were in combat. I had a brother who also served in World War II. He did not go overseas, frankly, until the war was over. He went to Japan. And I had a cousin who was on Iwo Jima. One of the things that I'm often asked is, how and why do you get involved in this? And I always start out by saying that I was asked by Gershom Nelson, who was a professor at EMU, if the Rotary wanted to get involved in the Veterans Program. And of course, at that time I was belonged to Rotary, and I said, oh, sure. Three grants later, we were off and running, and from there, as they say, it's history.
Well, it's good history, and speaking directly to your service, could you describe your avenue to joining the armed forces?
Yes, it was a frustrating time. When I was in graduate school, I learned that they were offering commissions to graduate social workers, and I applied. I saw just civilian clerks, and I kept getting forms that were out of date, and I'd have a physical and it wasn't updated enough, and so on and so on. And it took me about 9 months to finally get my commission. But one of the things that happened is that I went to my wife's godfather, and he brought me to the local representative. And I told him, I'm trying to get into the Army. They won't let me in. From that point on, all my communications were from the Adjutant General. So you could see what political influence I had at that point. I went to Fort Sam Houston at Brooke Army Medical Center. That's where I spent my entire career. But when I went to so-called training, which was a 4-week demonstration, except one day they would let you shoot, and then another day they would shoot at you, which was quite an experience. But I always remember, I went into, my class was about 400 people, mostly physicians, lots of nurses, a few biochemists, and me. And I was the only second lieutenant in the class. And the nurses used to say, geez, your bar's kind of tarnished. I said, no, I'm just the second lieutenant, which was a bit of a problem when I finally started serving.
Could you describe why that was a problem?
I was a little man on a totem pole, and when they tried to get rid of a technician, they always assigned him, finally, to Lieutenant Vollano's section. And, we knew at that point it was, they're on their way out. And I always remember one young black man came to me after we went through this process and says, I don't understand this, Lieutenant Vollano. I worked with Lieutenant Lonnie, and he's from Virginia, and I got along real well with him. And, why are you giving me a hard time? I felt like saying, listen, I was ordered to, but I didn't.
I apologize. Something in my throat.
No, that's okay.
You've described before the conversation you had with your dad when you became a first lieutenant. Could you describe that?
Well, he was so proud. And, this was when my daughter was born and my wife was in the hospital. And I kept telling him, Dad, there was nothing I could do not to be promoted to first lieutenant. After 18 months, it was automatic, but he was so proud, and he had that picture in his jewelry shop, and everybody would kind of look at it. But even being only a second lieutenant when my wife was pregnant and delivered, she had her own doctor, which was unheard of in the Army. She had her own private room. She had, I think they made their own bed. They didn't have you make the bed, did they? No. But in, there were majors' wives, captains, and lieutenant colonels' wives who were also delivering, and they were in a 6-bed ward. And they had to make their own beds. And that was something. It's the guy who was head of obstetrics at Brooke Army Medical Center felt that the staff needed some special benefits, and the special benefits were, your own doctor and a private room, if possible.
And Fort Sam Houston is in Texas, correct?
Absolutely, San Antonio.
Could you describe your experience at Fort Sam Houston?
Our first experience was we found a gorgeous apartment. Spick and, it was clean, you could almost eat off the floor. Come nighttime, the roaches were unbelievable. The cockroaches were all over the place. So we stayed there for a month and then finally moved out. We eventually moved into military housing. And of course, to get rid of the roaches, we had to fumigate just about every month. But our neighbors always said, well, it was you Army people that brought them in. No, it wasn't. I saw Army people. Those were native cockroaches.
And how long was your service at Sam Houston?
2 years. And the good thing about it, of course, is that my wife was with me every day of my military life, except when I was officer of the day and then I had to stay at the hospital overnight.
Could you describe a rewarding or positive experience that comes to mind with your time at Sam Houston?
Well, the thing that comes to mind vividly is that when I was officer of the day, a family member decided that they were not interested in an autopsy. And I had to go down to the morgue and stop the autopsy in the middle of it. So that was kind of a gruesome experience. But, other than that, everything was pretty much routine.
What do you think would be one of the larger benefits that you received from your military service?
The fact that my wife was with me every day.
Yeah.
I met some great people. I worked with some great people. I remember the psychiatrist I worked with was, I think he was 6'4", and of course we'd walk down the street together and we were like Mutt and Jeff. But we, and this was 1955-ish. We found a young man whose ambition it was to be towed along on some skis of some sort in a motorboat and be able to lift and fly, and we thought he was just crazy as a bug. Little did we know that he was predicting the future. You know, everybody is hang flying or whatever they call it now. But that was quite an experience.
And could you, I should have asked this earlier, but could you define what your years of service were?
You mean what years?
Yes, correct.
July 1955 to July 1957. And of course, 2 years after that, I was in the reserve, but not active reserve.
And could you describe how you met your wife?
Yeah, my sister-in-law didn't like the woman that I was going with. So, and I was in Delaware at the time. I was living in Delaware and going to school there. She set me up with a blind date, and that was
me.
that was it. She tried to set me up with one of her co-workers. She worked in a telephone company, and she already had a boyfriend. And then she asked Gina, well, Gina was reluctant until she found out that I was a graduate student at University of Pennsylvania, and that kind of made the difference.
And when were you two married? You said 67 years coming up.
Yeah, we were married in 1954, August 14th. So when August 14, 2022 comes around, it will be 68 years.
Well, early congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
And how many children do you have?
We have 3. And we have 5 grandchildren, and now 4 great-grandchildren.
Also, congratulations for that. That's quite a feat.
Well, we had nothing to do with that. But
Gotcha. Well, could you describe to me your involvement or how you got to Ann Arbor and the Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County area?
yeah, the agency that I started in New Haven was quite dependent on its relationship with the nursing agency. And the head of the nursing agency kind of tolerated us until she found somebody who came into the United Way who was more inclined to at least permit her to do things. And she decided that she would take on the part of the homemaker program that we had. So I was not interested in staying around, so I was looking around for another job. And went to New Jersey, thought I had it made there. Everybody thought I was great. Oh boy, did they ever think I was great. I didn't make that one. Went to Pittsburgh, and that was an exciting possibility. It was taking 3 services, 3 agencies, and putting them together. And there were 2 of us. We went through all sorts of interviews, and I think did they interview you in Pittsburgh?
No.
No? Well, they at least invited you.
Yeah.
I guess we tied in everything, except the priest liked me. The Monsignor liked the other guy. So, you know who got the job. Being kind of I don't know what, unappreciative or I don't know what, but the thing that made me happy, unquote, is that within 8 or 9 months they had to kick him out. He did such a bad job. But by that time I had interviewed here in Ann Arbor and impressed most of the board, with the exception of one lawyer who was on the board who didn't like the fact that I picked up my socks, you know, pick them up and pull them up. She thought that was terrible. But I took over the agency and had a budget of a little less than $500,000. By the time I left, it was nearer $6 million.
Gotcha. And so how long have you been in Ann Arbor at this point?
Well, you mean before I retired, or?
Or since you moved to Washtenaw County?
Well, since '77.
Gotcha. And have you lived at this same location, or?
Yeah, oh yeah, we bought this house in I guess we bought it in '77, and did a few little things here and there. It was not in such good shape, but at that time we were lucky for two reasons. First of all, it needed a lot of work, and I guess the people that looked at it were not interested in doing a lot of work. Didn't see the potential. And in addition to that, the person who owned it was always somewhere else. She was in Persia. So the real estate agent had the devil of a time trying to get her, you know, to sit down and look at things. Excuse me. So we were lucky that we got it, because at that time houses were going like they're going now. You know, you have to overbid, and we overbid $1,000 on one house that we liked in Georgetown, not the area, but the street, the road, or whatever. And I asked the real estate agent, would it help if we went 2,000 or more? And he says, no, they're committed to the first person that made the bid. So.
And what led you to the Ypsilanti Rotary Club?
Well, I had been a Rotarian in New Haven, and I joined the Ann Arbor Rotary, and it was a huge organization. It was over 200 members, and I preferred the smaller group, and that's why I transferred, if you will, to the Ypsilanti group, and I stayed there for quite a while.
Gotcha. And you've described earlier that your involvement with the Ypsilanti Rotary Club led you to the Veterans History Project.
Yes, it did.
What was your interactions like with the Library of Congress?
Well, Library of Congress was very helpful. They would supply any number of brochures and forms and kits and everything else that you wanted, but no money. So you had to go out and get your own. And it was a fairly decent relationship, you know. I got to know one of the people in the folklore section of the Library of Congress, but other than that, it was, you know, pretty business-like, standoffish.
What were some of those grants that you went and looked for the project?
You know, I don't even remember. There were a bunch of, I think there were about 3 small grants, you know, 5,000, maybe 10,000, I don't know. don't remember which. And with that, we bought cameras, tripods, converter recordings, things that will convert our tapes to DVDs, and that kind of thing. So.
Gotcha. I know I would,
and to buy the tapes too, of course.
and I know I would be remiss if I didn't ask about some of your more interesting or noteworthy interviewees over the years.
Oh yeah. The first one I remember, of course, was Leon Zimmerman, and he eventually ended up as a prisoner of war. But he talked about one of his bombing raids, and he said, they told us that there would be, I don't know how many guns firing at us, and he said, my heart kept beating. He said, but then they told us, well, you could, once you finish dropping your bombs, you could drop down to, several thousand feet. And he says, well, we felt better about that. But he said, little did we know that when we finished bombing, there were 2 pocket battleships there that really ripped us to shreds. And we were going home, and the pilot says, guys, I don't think we're going to make it, but Sweden is right over there. We can land this sucker there and sit out the rest of the war, or we could try to go back to England. And Leon said, his gunner piped up and says, the hell you say? I got a date back there, and we're going. And they made it back. So that, and eventually he was shot down and became a prisoner. But by other standards, his prisonership, if you will, was fairly mild. It wasn't like Jim Green, who was a gunner on a B-29, and of course the Japanese hated B-29 people. And they would beat him every day for no reason at all. He'd get up and he'd have to stand at kind of semi-attention, and they would beat him with these bamboo sticks. And it took a toll on him. So that was his experience. But I've interviewed probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 POWs, and their experiences were, just very opposite. Except, of course, Sonny Elliott, who for us, for Michigan people, know him as the old weatherman. Sonny Elliott was shot down, and the first thing they asked him is, what religion are you? And of course, without him blinking out of an eye, he said, I'm Lutheran. So they let him alone. And they said that, and he said that he was able to actually put shows on for the prisoners. It was not that they had a great time, but they were able to do all sorts of decent things. Another guy that ended up being a prisoner in Germany said that he got beat every day for nothing. Anything and nothing. They would beat him mercilessly. So, you never know.
And on the wall to your right, there's a pamphlet from one of your interviewees. Could you describe?
Charlie Kettles?
Yes.
Well, you know, I had finished interviewing Charlie, as far as I was concerned. And his wife came down the stairs and said, Charlie, did you tell him about, I don't know if it was May or March, something. And he sat down, I sat down, and he started telling me. And I was unbelievably amazed at what he did. And of course, in the process of helping and getting these wounded and other soldiers evacuated, he ruined, I don't know how many, not that he ruined, but the gunfire was such that by the time he got back to base, the helicopters were unflyable. So the last trip he had to borrow one from another unit. When, you know, he came back and they were leaving, and they said, well, wait a minute, there's 8 guys there, still there, so he had to turn around, come back. He overloaded the helicopter, and he said it was hard to get lift, so he kind of bounced on the dry riverbed, and finally was able to elevate and go out. Excuse me. And I just went home and I called him up and I said, Charlie, would you have any objection if I took some effort to upgrade one of your medals? He says, no, go ahead, go to it. So at that point, I contacted the people that were with him and people that knew him. And they all said, one of the most common things that they said was, if it wasn't for Charlie, I wouldn't be here today. Excuse me. And I don't know how many of them there were like that. So I finally did get to the local representative. At the time was Congressman Dingell. And when he died, it was his wife that took over. And she assigned the process to one of her aides, Vespumi, who did a fantastic job of making sure that all of the T's were crossed and I's were dotted and everything else. And we went through the whole, everybody presented a statement, but then Army said, well, they got to be certified. So she had to go back and get them all certified. The whole process took 4.5 years.
That's a long time.
I understand that it really was not that long a time. But to me, thinking back at what I went through trying to get my commission, I became very impatient. And at the time, of course, Obama was president, and I said to Vespumi, I'm going to call him, you know, because I'm a Democrat, he's a Democrat. We got to get this going. And she said, no, don't do anything. She says, it's progressing, so just leave it alone. And she kind of kept me grounded, which was fortunate, because I think if I screwed it up, I might have screwed it up for Charlie too. But he got that, and we were all invited to the ceremony, which was in the White House, and we got to see Obama. And as I think I've told you before, up to this point, my claim to fame was that me, 10, 11 other students at University of Connecticut had dinner with Eleanor Roosevelt, and I thought that was my claim to fame. But in Obama's presentation, he cited me 4 different times. So that's not my claim to fame.
That must have been a wonderful trip to Washington.
Oh, it was unbelievable.
And I'm glad you brought up Eleanor Roosevelt. Could you describe your experience having dinner with her?
You know, I was young and stupid. Probably didn't realize fully what she was. After that time, and as I matured, I guess, she became one of my favorite ladies. And I just read just tons of stuff about her, and she was always a real hero to me. But not when I was having dinner with her. It was, you know, she was speaking at some community affair, and if you ever heard her speak, you knew that she didn't have the kind of speech that was pleasant to the ear, or I didn't think at the time it was. But when she spoke, you could hear a pin drop. You know, she just had everybody right with her. Yeah.
That's a lovely story. Shifting gears just a little
Yeah.
bit, what has your involvement been with the VA hospital here in Ann Arbor?
At first, very good. I was meeting with the group that was POW group, and did a number of interviews with those POW groups. But then suddenly, one day I was taping, and some woman came in and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm taking an interview for the Veterans History Project." And she asked, "Well, who gave you permission?" And I told her. Well, that was that. And I was kind of nonplussed after that, so I stayed away. And eventually they got their own person to do those interviews anyhow. So, in terms of the project, there was nothing lost. So they continued doing interviews with the veterans there. And of course, they had a captive population.
Were you involved at all in the naming of the VA hospital after Chuck Kettles?
No, not that. I talked with somebody at the VVA 310 and said, we ought to name this unit as the Charlie Kittle unit. And I was told at the time that they didn't name units for living veterans. Well, a few months later they named it. and not because I said it, but remember they told me that they couldn't do it. I don't know what changed in that time, but it's now the Charlie Kittle's VVA 310.
That was actually my next question, was some of your involvement with the veterans organizations in the community. Could you describe your history with those?
Well, I joined as an auxiliary member of the VVA 310, Vietnam Veterans of America. and did a lot of interviews of members there. You know, they were, for the most part, reluctant, but I guess eventually I was able to get probably 7 or 8 or 9, I don't know how many veterans that finally agreed to be interviewed. So, and as I said, next month they're going to make me an honorary member, me and a man by the name of Fromm. It's going to be at their annual banquet, which should be a nice affair.
Do you have any other comments you'd like to make about the Veterans History Project or your service?
Well, you know, one of the things that I keep talking about is the fact that a friend of mine that I knew for 25 years was in a unit that landed in Normandy the day before D-Day. And even though I knew him for 25 years, I did not know that he had that kind of service. So, you know, that was something that we missed out on. As I did with my uncles, you know, as I said, I had 4 uncles who saw a battle of one form or another. 2 of them were considered 100% disabled. My uncle Rudy landed in Normandy. His experience was that since he was the sergeant, squad leader, he was the first off the amphibious ship. And he said that the guy who brought the landing craft in didn't go all the way, so when he got off, the water was over his head. And he didn't know how to swim. So he nearly drowned. But then he finally recovered and went and got banged up miserably with some machine gun shots and shrapnel when he was at Walter Reed Hospital. He looked like he had been in a German concentration camp. He was just skin and bone.
And you had another uncle who fought in the Pacific, correct?
I had a cousin, well, I had an uncle, yes, my Uncle Al, and I don't remember much of what he did. But I also had my cousin who was on EWO. He was in the Marines. And I had 2 other uncles who served in Europe. One of them was in artillery. I don't remember where the other one was. But the one that was in artillery was pretty much banged up. And he got 100% disability.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you'd like to say for posterity? Like I said, this will be digitally stored in the University Archives at Eastern Michigan. So now would be a time to talk to future generations of students and veterans. Well,
first of all, I'm indebted to Eastern Michigan University. As I said before, I've been trying for the better part of a year, maybe even more, to find somebody who was willing to take the program on. And I went to I went to at least 4 or 5 different institutions locally. And each time I got good reception. They always said, hey, this is great, and let's do it. No follow-up, none whatsoever. Except that when we got to the archives unit at Eastern, there was more than follow-up. There was enthusiasm. I got to the archives, by the way, through Mary Ellen Vineyard, who was, I guess, is now emeritus in the history department, and she referred me to the new guy in the history department, the new head, and he, of course, got the archive people involved. So that was a great experience. Everything seemed to fall right in place. It was fantastic. And of course, then you popped in and had to listen to me for 40 or more hours.
And like I said, it's been good to get to know you and your wife and be in your home.
Well, it's good knowing you too, Connor. And as I said, I one of the things that I said to one of my friends in VVA 310 is that the price for my honorary membership is finding me 3 interviews. So he's found one for me, and maybe when I'm able to nail that one down, I can actually get you involved in it so we can see firsthand what I do wrong.
Oh no, how the master does it. I must say, this, I was nervous in preparation for this. Obviously you've done so many of these interviews and had served as such a great example of questions to ask and sort of being comfortable with the interviewee. One of the final questions I have would be, do you have any comments to young folks or people thinking about joining the armed forces?
Joining the armed forces, I don't know. One of the things that I would wish that they do is to learn more about history and know more about the wars and whys and hows and so on, including World War I and World War II and Vietnam, and my favorite war, of course, is the Korean War. That's where, it's called the Forgotten War. That's where one of my first friends was killed in action. Joe Figaro, probably the first day he landed in Korea, he was killed. So, I would hope that they would take some time and learn more about these wars, more about the people who were involved in them. Not all of them were POWs, not all of them were in action, but they all provided some sacrifice. So yeah, that's my message, I guess.
Well, I think it's a great message, and I just wanted to say thank you again for agreeing to sit down, and this has been absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you, Connor, and as I say, I'm not going to let you get by without you seeing some of my pictures, so I'm going to have to show you, and
I'm looking forward to it.
okay, good.
So, thank you again,
Thank you.
and we'll continue on looking at some photos. So thanks again, Bill.
Good. Thanks.